RTX. Nvidia marketed RTX back in 2018 when they changed their entire name of their graphics cards to RTX instead of GTX.
So Turing is built for RTX.
It was a pretty revolutionary thing because Nvidia was claiming, hey, ray tracing is the future.
This is where we came from. You got to be proud of it. You got to own it. Before, after. Before RTX, after RTX.
Let's go ahead and check out RTX. All right, I'm in Cyberpunk here. One of the games that most uses ray tracing to like benefit, where people actually talk about it is like, oh, this is a good thing. What the hell was that? Yeah, it doesn't mean it's a perfect game. Right now, we're not using any ray tracing in Cyberpunk. All right, I just want to show you a little demonstration. As you see in the top left corner of the screen, I was running around for a bit, so this is fully loaded. We're at about 6.3 gigabytes of used video memory. Yeah, the game looks pretty good even without ray tracing. But let's go ahead and just turn on ray tracing, just a simple form of ray tracing, like ray traced reflections. And you're going to see that VRAM consumption jump up. We almost jumped up by 2 gigabytes of VRAM. And also our FPS got cut like almost in half just by turning on ray trace reflections. I think this deserves another video coming up soon to see if ray tracing is really worth it, but now we get reflections on the ground. But this isn't the highest form of ray tracing you can get in this game. So yes, we can up it again. Let's turn on things like sun shadows, local shadows, and ray trace lighting up to ultra. First off, our FPS is gonna drop like crazy, but also our VRAM consumption is going to continue to rise. So remember, we started at like 6.3 gigabytes of VRAM used, and now we're up to 9.3. We've gone up 3 gigabytes of VRAM. Our FPS is in an unusable territory at this point. What if you have graphics cards that don't have enough VRAM? Because right now I'm on the 5060 Ti, which does have an 8 gigabyte version of this graphics card, but I'm currently on the 16 gigabyte one, which costs quite a bit of money. So let's take a step back into reality. What graphics cards are most people actually buying? Jumping over to the Steam hardware survey, the top graphics card in the world right now, according to Steam, is RTX 3060. The only graphics card here that has more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM in this top part of the charts, you know, maybe minus the 4070, is a 3060. This card is 12 gigabytes of VRAM, or it could. There's actually a 3060 that only has 8 gigabytes of VRAM. So most of the most popular graphics cards in the world only have 8 gigabytes, and as we saw, ray tracing can use quite a bit more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM pretty easily. So the RTX 5060 did just come out, and I made a whole video about it. And if you look at the prices of this graphics card, yes, it is entry level. It is going for $300. You can buy this graphics card for MSRP at $300. This is like something that's unheard of. We didn't think you could buy graphics cards at MSRP, but it has that crucial downside of being an 8 gigabyte card, which means it's going to struggle with ray tracing in so many games. It's stupid. Now, Nvidia might argue that RTX stands for having tensor cores in it, which is the AI cores. We love AI. Gamers love AI, I swear.
But it's not because we don't love GeForce. 800 balls on the bottom?
800 balls. But seriously, this 8 gigabyte 5060, very malnourished and under-equipped if it wants to actually use RTX. And this doesn't change a whole lot as you go up. Now, Nvidia also offers a 5060 Ti. Now, the 5060 Ti has 2 versions, an 8 gigabyte and a 16 gigabyte one. This one is going for $380. This is going for MSRP now, which is pretty cool. At least some things feel like they're healing, but this is also 8 gigabytes. So Nvidia's first 2 graphics cards are offering with the 50 series only have 8 gigabytes of VRAM. So you have to jump all the way up to the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte to get $430. There's one available at MSRP. A lot of other ones are $480 because this card has 16 gigabytes of VRAM. So this is where it enters another company, AMD. Now, AMD has seen this opportunity and they've been like, oh, we can provide more VRAM at the same price points, which will make our graphics cards maybe better equipped. Now let's look at the RX 9060 XT. Now this guy is 16 gigabytes of VRAM and it's going for $350. If you can buy it at that price point, they are sold out probably because of how popular they are, or because AMD can't keep them in stock. Like they can't make enough of them or something. They're cheaper than the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte, but they're not super cheap. AMD is also offering an 8 gigabyte graphics card here that is still going for $300. It's MSRP price. That's for another time to talk about. Don't think this card is safe. So you never think this day would come that AMD is better at RTX than RTX cards are. I know it's not actually called RTX. The Nvidia brainwash here, making it RTX in my brain. Against the 5060, we're just looking at Assassin's Creed Shadows. I know everybody's favorite game. At 1080p, this is using the ray tracing everywhere setting in the game, so this is ray tracing. It's 27% faster on the 9060 XT. Yeah, AMD has made improvements to ray tracing on the 9060 XT and RDNA 4, the architecture that this is based on. That immediately leads it to be quite a bit faster, at least in this title, even though I don't think the 5060 is super limited by VRAM here. We hop over to Cyberpunk 2077. At 1080p, you know, we just turned on ray trace reflections a second ago and checked that out. Well, the 9060 XT is 59% faster than the 5060 if you just turn on ray trace reflections. That's 100% faster on the 1% lows as well. Now, these numbers, as you see on the right side, are the 1% lows, basically represent how much is the graphics card stuttering. So these are the bottom, the average percentage of the frame rates, the dips that are in the game. And that's because of extra VRAM. When you hit VRAM limitations, a lot of the time you end up getting stutters as the system's trying to load the data into the GPU. Also to mention, the 9060 XT is getting about 60 FPS. And I think that's a huge thing. Like, you could actually play on these settings on the 9060 XT. The 5060, despite it being RTX, you can't do this. Now, if you were to turn on some upscaling, the 9060 XT is still 64% faster than the 5060 and 129% faster on the 1% lows. It's getting like 90 FPS, it's getting over 90 FPS, and the 5060 is still stuck below 60 on its average. So not really a great experience on the 5060 despite rendering the game at like 720p and upscaling it to 1080p. And this also means because of the extra VRAM on the 9060 XT, 210% faster at 1440p with some upscaling. I mean, that's a huge difference. If you look over at the 5060, it looks kind of crazy. It's stuttering all over the place. And I think it's having these issues because of DLSS 4, the transformer model. This version of it does use a higher quality model for the AI upscaling, which does mean, at least from what I've experienced, it needs to have more memory on the chip allocated to it, when upscaling usually alleviates some of the VRAM problems. Now, if you use the older model of DLSS, it performs a little bit better, but the 9060 XT with way more VRAM does handle the situation still so much better. Now, we want to move on to ray tracing overdrive. This is path tracing in Cyberpunk. I wouldn't even attempt this on the 5060. It is just, oh man, it is bad. But the 9060 is cruising. It's not like playable. It's still just a little over 30 FPS, but at least you can run this on the 9060 XT. And this is using upscaling at 1080p. We head over to Plague Tale Requiem at 1080p with just ray trace shadows on in the games. Not much ray tracing. The 9060 XT, despite it being AMD, and Nvidia made this damn feature pretty much to run in real-time ray tracing, it's 17% faster on the AMD card. I don't think the 5060, at least in the length of this test, it's pretty short, isn't really running out of VRAM. Let's hop over to Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. We're at 1080p, which is ray tracing high. It is 74% faster on the 9060 XT. It is running laps around this shit. And the same type of experience can go to 1440p if you use a little bit of upscaling. You see that 9060 XT is still getting 74 average FPS. That's 147% faster. That card is struggling in this game. The same type of thing happens in Spider-Man Miles Morales. I just have to show you this gameplay so you see what the difference is. This is what happens when you have an 8GB graphics card, one of the only things that Nvidia actually offers with their entry-level cards this time around. In Doom the Dark Ages as well, this game uses ray tracing all the time. The 9060 XT is still ahead, and it's playing pretty comfortably if you want to play at 1440p with upscaling. The 5060 doesn't seem to have a VRAM problem, at least in this case. Now, I gotta throw a bone over to the 5060 and Black Myth Wukong. Now, this game isn't very VRAM heavy, so you don't run into those type of issues. But now, this is usually a very Nvidia favored title. You know, even with upscaling at 1080p, the 9060 XT is 38% slower on average and 33% slower in the 1% lows, but it's still only getting 42 average FPS on the 5060. So I won't really call this like playable. And we're already upscaling at 1080p, so I don't think the 5060 will ever get you there. But it's interesting to see where it can win. And in Alan Wake 2 at 1080p with upscaling, so we're rendering at like 720p and upscaling to 1080p. They actually are about even with the ray tracing in this title, but neither of them are really getting above 30 FPS. So you're not really going to be playing on this whatsoever. So Nvidia's entry-level RTX graphics card can't really do RTX. Because on average, if we just want to take all these at 1080p ray tracing, all the tests I did with ray tracing, the 9060 XT is 42% faster on average. If you want to include the 1% lows, because of the reduced VRAM on the 5060, that means the 9060 XT is 71% faster in the 1% lows. It is stuttering a lot less. We hop up to 1440p. Not that you would ever really be ray tracing on either of these cards at 1440p, to be honest, but the 9060 XT is 64% faster on average, 98% faster in the 1% lows. Now, I do want to mention something when it comes down to VRAM consumption on these graphics cards. This is something that Hardware Unbox recently just made a video on, which I think is super useful, and it is this here. And they talked about Radeon RX 9060 XT with PCIe 3.0, 4.0, and 5.0. So PCI Express is the damn slot that you plug the graphics card into on your system. As you go older with your different motherboards and CPUs and stuff, sometimes they can only support certain levels of PCIe. The newest one can support like 5.0. There's a 4.0, there's 3.0. As you see, this is just an example with the 9060 XT 8GB. On Gen 5, it's getting like 53 FPS. On Gen 4, it's getting like 45 FPS. On Gen 3, it's getting like 32 FPS. If you compare it on the right side here, on Gen 3, the slowest PCIe mode, the 16GB 9060 XT is getting 68 FPS. So more than all of these, all right? And that's because as you run out of VRAM on your system, your graphics card offloads that memory that it needs and offloads that to your system memory. As you'll see in a lot of these tests, the 5060, if you look at the memory on the system, so as you see my CPU and then the memory right below it for RAM, it's going to be higher consumption on the 5060 when it's running out of VRAM because it's offloading some of that to the system memory. Now this ends up having limitations when it comes up to the PCIe bandwidth. It needs to transfer that data to the RAM on your system. It seems like the 5060 stutters quite a damn bit. And that's because I'm only using PCIe Gen 4 on this system. Now that's just how I test. That's because my riser cable doesn't run Gen 5. My motherboard actually does support PCIe Gen 5, but I don't typically use it. Honestly, I think this is a pretty typical usage scenario for a lot of people. So it really sucks about the 5060. You would want to upgrade like an older system to have a newer graphics card in it. This is like a budget graphics card. You might not upgrade everything at the same time. And this card only has 8GB of VRAM, which severely limits it. Turns out anything with this, and I've done testing on this as well with some other graphics cards like the 4060 Ti and such, is the 5060 only has a ×8 configuration on PCIe, which means if you have an older system as well, then it's only going to use half the bandwidth of the 9060 XT. The 9060 XT has a ×16 interface for the PCIe, so it can use a lot more bandwidth even on the slower versions of PCIe. So the 5060, when it runs out of VRAM, it's going to be hit extremely hard, especially if you're on older systems. And that's just like an instance of Nvidia cheaping out on the VRAM and Nvidia cheaping out on the PCIe bandwidth. There's just nothing redeemable here. Now these are budget graphics cards, and you might want to say like, oh, you wouldn't expect to do ray tracing on these cards, but you might want to fucking try it. I mean, you bought a new graphics card. Do you want to try ray tracing? In terms of this price to performance on the 5060 versus the 9060 XT, if you look in rasterized performance, which I only think that most people that are getting these graphics cards are going to be looking more at raster instead of ray tracing. So honestly, in terms of the performance, the 9060 XT, even raster, not just ray tracing, presenting pretty damn significant performance uplifts over the RTX 5060 in a lot of these games. That's one part due to the extra VRAM. Now, the 9060 XT is still more expensive by a good amount, but still, at this price point, is more competing to Nvidia's RTX 5060 Ti 8GB. These are more the exact same price, and this card has 8GB of VRAM. So despite the 5060 Ti being more expensive, it's going to struggle just as much in terms of ray tracing. Now, I don't have the 8GB 5060 Ti to exactly show you that, but it has tons of issues. You'll see some stuff from like Daniel Owen, see some stuff from Hardware Unbox, with their side-by-sides, how many issues that this card runs into. This is the 9060 XT 16GB review, and here is the 5060 Ti 8GB. You see it's only getting 62 FPS compared to the 9060 XT. Now this is not ray tracing, this is at 1440p, which does use more VRAM. There's an 8 FPS difference here. In the 5060 Ti, here is the 16GB card, and then here is the 8GB card. So despite these having the exact same GPU die, they are much, much further apart. They perform so much different, especially when it comes to things like ray tracing, or going up in resolution in many, many different games, or increasing texture detail, that type of stuff. So Nvidia is offering these 8GB graphics cards that really can't do that much ray tracing. When you even compare it, the 5060 to the Arc B580, this is Intel's graphics card, but this is a 12GB graphics card for $250, so $50 less than the 5060. Ray tracing is a lot closer than you might think. Even on average, these cards average out because of how inconsistent the 5060 is when it comes from title to title because of the limited VRAM. What I think is hilarious though, is how Nvidia advertises these graphics cards. Yes, they advertise the RTX 5060, for example, on ray tracing. So here is Nvidia's website. This is their own data. Yes, there's all of these points on the left side here, which use multi-frame generation. I hate going over this every time because it's so misleading. Here is Resident Evil 4. This is the only data that they show for the RTX 5060. The only data they show has ray tracing on it. They're marketing this card with either using multi-frame generation, which uses more VRAM as well. There's many issues with 5060 and multi-frame generation. You'll actually see sometimes that the 5060 performs worse when enabling frame generation because frame generation uses more VRAM. On the 5060 Ti, it shows in the fine print here that they're testing the 16GB versions of the 5060 Ti and the 4060 Ti, obviously putting the 5060 Ti in its best light. And they're also only advertising this card using ray tracing. So to me, this kind of stuff feels damn near just like false advertising. Is like, you're not really going to use ray tracing on the 5060. Really, you're not going to use ray tracing until the 5060 Ti 16GB because it's not really available at the $430 MSRP, which maybe it will come down eventually here. It seems like they're starting to work their way down, but it's regularly more available at $480. So this card is expensive. You can't even start to really use Nvidia's features unless you pay this much on one of their new graphics cards. What I find really interesting too, this holds up so much better. If Nvidia gives their graphics cards more VRAM, then it competes way more closely with the 9060 XT. Because at 1080p with ray tracing, I found the 5060 Ti is about 25% faster than 9060 XT. These are both the 16GB versions of these graphics cards. If we jump up to 1440p, where more VRAM is used, also the 5060 Ti has faster VRAM, but quite a bit faster, 31% faster on average now. I will say that even at 1440p, the 5060 Ti on average is only getting about 35 FPS though, so you're not really gonna be ray tracing at native 1440p. Maybe in some more titles you could use some upscaling to get away with it a bit more. And this shows in a lot of titles, the 5060 Ti 16GB is a good bit faster in terms of ray tracing. This is where you would expect these cards to line up. It's not like the 9060 XT holds up poorly. AMD is competing relatively well, but you're paying quite a bit more for the Nvidia graphics card, so I think it makes sense here. So this makes me think of the 5060, the base 5060 at $300. If this card had more than 8GB of VRAM, it would probably stack up a lot better against the 9060 XT, which I just think is insane. Nvidia advertises this feature, and then not a lot of their cards can even leverage the feature. And it gets worse as you go up the pricing stack for Nvidia, at least in my opinion, because Nvidia also offers the RTX 5070 RT and Resident Evil 4, just like the other ones, but they offer Horizon Forbidden West with DLSS. There's only one title here that doesn't use ray tracing or some kind of multi-frame generation bullshit. And how does that card hold up in terms of ray tracing performance? Well, not that great, because we see Hardware Unbox's data here versus the 9070 XT. This is AMD's $600 graphics card, which honestly, would you think AMD's card would beat Nvidia's graphics card in terms of ray tracing performance? These are about neck and neck, the 5070 and the 9070 XT, because the 9070 XT has more VRAM and AMD did make improvements in terms of ray tracing on this card. And this also shows that the 9070, 59 FPS here, honestly, relatively close to the 5070. And why does the 5070 have so many issues? Well, because the 5070 only has 12GB of VRAM, despite it being $550. It actually has less VRAM than the 5060 Ti, at least the 16GB version. You can see this being an issue in some specific titles, like Daniel Owen here is showing Ray Tracing Ultra in Cyberpunk, which uses quite a bit of VRAM, and this guy is on performance upscaling. The 9070 from AMD is beating the 5070 from Nvidia. The 9070 XT is beating it by 22%, all in the same price range here. That's because you see at the top of the screen, it is getting pretty close in terms of its memory performance. As you see, the 9070 is using almost 10 gigabytes of VRAM, and it's allocating over 12 gigabytes. The 9070 XT is relatively in that range as well. So even up to $550, the 5070 is still malnourished in terms of its VRAM. It should be able to get a better performance than it is. And I've seen this in my own testing with the 4070 Super. In terms of performance, the 4070 Super is really damn close to the 5070. You compare it to the 9070 XT, and you can see the VRAM limitations on the 4070 Super become issues. These cards are anemic, but you're really looking at a 5070 Ti. These guys are like $840, and they're the first Nvidia graphics card with enough ray tracing performance. Like the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte has enough VRAM, but not enough performance. But the 5070 Ti has 16 gigabytes, and it has enough ray tracing performance to maybe actually start using it in some goddamn video games. And then this card is $840. You could buy two 9060 XT 16 gigabytes for the price of one 5070 Ti, just to get the ray tracing features, the RTX, that is really advertised on the damn name of the graphics card. Nvidia is offering these cards that can't really do any ray tracing, either don't have the performance or they don't have the VRAM capacity. And AMD is in a position where they can get better ray tracing performance than Nvidia. It's a crazy situation, and they did offer that. The problem is AMD, and I'm going to make a follow-up video on this because it is just ridiculous. But AMD has to go and spoil the whole situation by making an 8 gigabyte version of the 9060 XT, poisoning the well. Like the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte is better at ray tracing, has FSR 4, is at a competitive price point of an MSRP of $350, which as we see has been sold out. So obviously people are interested in this graphics card. If I look on Micro Center right now, here's a 9060 XT. If you scroll down, there's a lot of the 8 gigabyte versions of these graphics cards, but if you scroll down a bit, then you can start to find some of the 16 gigabyte ones. And there actually is one available at the MSRP of $350. It's only two in stock, at least at the Micro Center I go to. You could get this card at $350, and at $350 is honestly a really good deal. But this card goes ahead and has to just spoil and ruin everything. This was supposed to be a happy day, but basically AMD had to go and ruin the whole thing. AMD just needs to shut up. Their freaking executives have to go on Twitter and cope that 1080p, everybody just plays at 1080p, and nobody plays games that run with over 8 gigabytes of VRAM, even though we saw so many regular examples, 9060 XT running so much better than like a 5060 or something like that because of the VRAM capacity on the graphics card. This is such a stupid thing. And I actually found it really funny that Grok here, the AI on Twitter, made a pretty amazing summary of this situation. Grok is kind of based. I do want to mention too, because this is sort of a 9060 XT review, the 16 gigabyte graphics card, mostly, to be honest. But I did want to compare it to the 7600 XT, which would technically be this graphics card's last gen counterpart. It's pretty impressive to see what the 9060 XT has done here, what AMD has done here. Rasterized performance, if we just look at 1080p, the 9060 XT is about 39% faster on average in so many titles. And at 1440p, it's 43% faster on average. That's a lot, because the 7600 XT was $330 last generation with RDNA 3. 9060 XT at MSRP is technically $350, so $20 increase, but you're getting like 40% more performance. I mean, that's pretty insane. Both of these cards do have 16 gigabytes of VRAM. And if we look at the ray tracing performance on average, I found the 9060 XT to literally be twice as fast as the 7600 XT. You would pretty much never ray trace on the 7600 XT. That'd be pretty stupid. You wouldn't really ray trace that much on the 9060 XT either, but twice as fast is pretty insane for a generation of graphics cards. Now, what's interesting as well is against AMD's last generation 7700 XT, because this is kind of closer in line to the 9060 XT in terms of price. 7700 XT did go as low as $380 last generation before, but it did technically start at $450 and then dropped to like around $400 for a lot of its life. And the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte is actually about the same rasterized performance as the 7700 XT. And at least in a lot of the tests that I did. Now the 7700 XT only has 12 gigabytes of VRAM, whereas you're getting 4 more gigabytes on the 60 XT here. But in terms of the ray tracing performance, as we see a lot of these things shine, at 1080p, the 9060 XT is like 35% faster. This isn't using upscaling or anything like that, so you could probably use upscaling, get playable performance on the 9060 XT. Now the power consumption is pretty impressive as well. So as you see in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, it's getting a little bit of a higher frame rate. And then you look up at the top and the 7700 XT is drawing over 200 watts, close to like 215, 210 a lot of the time. The 9060 XT is hovering around like 175 watts. So this is in rasterized performance. When we hop over to ray tracing, and Alan Wake 2 with quality upscaling at 1080p, ray tracing medium, so this is pretty heavy ray tracing in the game, you see that the 7700 XT draws even more power than it did in just a raster game. Now it's like over 220 watts a lot of the time, whereas the 9060 XT is more like 175 still. So a lot more power efficient, especially when it comes to ray tracing. Now, if you want to stack this up against AMD's RDNA 4 graphics cards here, so the 9070 XT, generally speaking on the market right now, the 9070 XT is over twice as much as the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte. Now, what's interesting is both these cards have 16 gigabytes of VRAM. The 9070 XT has like twice the memory bandwidth because the 9060 XT is basically half of a 9070 XT, like straight up in like every metric, the bus width, the GPU die size, all that kind of stuff. And in terms of rasterized performance though, that doesn't mean it gets half the performance. At 1440p, I found the 9070 XT on average to be about 68% faster. It isn't half the performance on the 9060 XT. If you jump up to 4K, it is 82% faster on the 9070 XT. That probably is because of the increased memory bandwidth. And the 9070 XT has a pretty large lead in terms of the ray tracing performance, maybe making ray tracing a little bit more usable of a feature, especially with some upscaling at 1440p or something like that. I wouldn't really recommend it on the 9060 XT. So pretty damn interesting. And if you want to know my thoughts on the card itself, this 9060 XT 16 gigabyte was sent to me by AMD, which I think is kind of funny because they didn't send the 8 gigabyte one. I know, crazy thing, I even asked them to send the 8 gigabyte card, but they knew it was going to get reviewed poorly by so many people, so they just said, hey, okay, we're not going to do that. They're doing the same shit as Nvidia does. Now this card itself, this is the Asus Prime model. I have the Asus Prime model of the 5070 Ti as well. This card runs pretty well, I would say. I mean, the temperature is under control. I flipped the BIOS switch on the card as well, and it doesn't really perform any different on either BIOS, so I wouldn't really like consider that at all. But it is 3 fans. What I think is funny is it is an absolutely massive graphics card, but it only has 2 heat pipes in it. But the back plate is metal, and there's also pads on the back of it because the memory is clamshelled. So there's memory on the front by the GPU die. There's also memory on the back. The card I think is pretty nice, and this apparently is supposed to be an MSRP, I think, 9060 XT. But this is a crazy situation where here in 2025, we see, you'd think almost every time so far with ray tracing history, that Nvidia cards were on top. Not necessarily if Nvidia makes their cards so anemic that it can't even use this damn feature that they advertise on their cards. And this really goes all the way up into the RTX 5070 with 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So yeah, the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte is pretty damn good. If you can get it for $350, I recommend it. It's going to get a lot of things done. AMD still needs to work on some things. This will be an upcoming video. So let me know what you think about the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte. Would you buy an AMD card for RTX, or would you buy an RTX card for RTX? I mean, like, you would think it wouldn't be a decision, but that's the situation we're in, where Nvidia is intentionally hamstringing their graphics cards to make you want to spend more and more and more if you want to actually use the features they advertise on the damn box, or what they put in the damn name of the graphics card. I know, crazy thing. Let me know what you think, and I'm gonna see you in the next one. All right, peace.